Welcome, everyone. We are going to walk you through the different parts of a eukaryotic cell. A eukaryotic cell, remember, a eukaryotic cell, you are a eukaryotic cell. You have a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. You are a eukaryotic cell. Okay, so when we talk about eukaryotic cells, we're talking about animal cells and we're talking about plant cells. Okay, so a lot of times we're going to go through and we talk about an analogy. An analogy is something that we go through and we're trying to make a comparison using everyday information to kind of compare to a complex situation. So the nucleus and the parts of the nucleus, the analogy we often use is we compare it to a factory. Okay, so as we're going through, there's a lot of these. We are going to these words that are in these greens. That is our factory analogy that we'll kind of be walking through. Okay, so when we talk about the cell factory kind of analogy, that's what we're referencing. So we say eukaryotic cells are like a factory. They are very complex, even though they're really small, but they have a lot of common structures, no matter if they are a muscle cell or a skin cell or a hair cell or a blood cell. And these specialized organs are known as organelles. Okay, so when we talk about like the nucleus, that's an organelle. When we talk about the cell membrane, that's an organelle. When we talk about, what else do we have over here? I don't see any other organelles labeled on our picture, but that's what we're talking about. So they're breaking down into two general regions. So we talk about things in the nucleus or things not in the nucleus, or the cytoplasm, which is just this area outside of the nucleus. So the nucleus, let's talk about the nucleus. It's the control center of the cell. It's what controls the cell. It contains DNA. DNA is crucial for coding for proteins. We're all about making proteins. Proteins express traits. And the idea is it contains that. It's the control center of the cell is what we say. It's surrounded by something called a nuclear envelope or nuclear membrane. Really all we're saying is there's a membrane. It's bound by this outer shell that kind of keeps the stuff in it. So for our analogy, it's like the boss of a cell. It tells everyone what to do. So in the cell, it tells all the other organelles what to do because of the DNA. When we talk about DNA, our DNA is going to be in the form of something called chromatin. And chromatin is DNA that happens to be in the uncoiled form and is spread out in the nucleus most of the time. And it's so small we can't even see it, but it's something that is important. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get to mitosis and meiosis. Within the nucleus is this region called the nucleolus, and it's this inner region there, and it's where ribosomes are created. So what's a ribosome? It's critical in terms of making proteins. So cells are trying to make proteins. These proteins get assembled on the ribosomes. Okay, so in the cellular factory is making these proteins. So if we're talking about our analogy, they are the small machines in our factory that are going to make these particular proteins based upon the orders it gets from the boss or the DNA that it receives, the control center. Okay, so muscle cells are going to have a lot more, cells that are very active in making proteins, so that are expressing these traits, they're going to have a lot more ribosomes, just like cells that are using more energy are going to have different things. More of different organelles. So we have this really big word called endoplasmic reticulum. For ease of things, we just call it ER. So the endoplasmic reticulum is the site where the lipids for cell membranes are assembled along with the proteins. Some of these, a portion of the ER has all these little dots on them, right? You can see all these little dots, and they look very rough in appearance. So we call it a rough ER. That portion is called the rough. But then this part right here, there aren't any bumps there, so we call it smooth ER. Okay, but the ER is like the assembly line putting together the finished products in our factory analogy. The Golgi apparatus, I always think this looks like stacks of pancakes. Like I'm making a stack of pancakes and I'm just piling them high on the plate. So proteins are made in rough ER, then they move to the Golgi apparatus. Okay, they're closely stacked membranes. The function is to sort, modify, sort, and package proteins. Okay, so these are going to package our proteins to get them ready to be shipped to their final destination in the cell or even outside of the cell. And they form these little things called vesicles. So these are the packaged things that are like ready to go. They kind of pinch off on the ends and then they kind of go floating around in the cell. So if we're talking about a factory, the Golgi apparatus is the shipping department. They're getting things ready to send. So the proteins are assembled on the endoplasmic reticulum. They go to the Golgi apparatus ready to get shipped out. Lysosomes, they are the cleanup crew of the cells. And they have enzymes, and enzymes are a type of chemical that do specific functions. And sometimes the functions are for digestion of these bigger molecules that are going to be used by the cell. Or sometimes when organelles just get old, they eat up old non-functioning organelles. So like a mitochondria or an endoplasmic reticulum goes bad, this lysosome might engulf it and then like digest it or break it up. The vacuole, both plant and animals have vacuoles. However, plants have a much larger vacuole that stores materials. Generally, when we talk about storing material, we generally are referring to storing water. It's very large. They often talk about large central vacuole found in plants. And the intent of this is when this is full of water, it's going to create pressure that pushes out in all directions on the cell, which is going to cause the plant to then stay rigid or upright and grow vertically. What happens when this vacuole gets low? It droops in and there's not that pressure and your plant will wilt, right? You've seen a plant that needs water, you put it in the water and it stands back up. That's exactly because the vacuole is not full. Okay, so it's one of the examples of homeostasis. That's one of those common themes that we talk about for that maintaining a stable internal environment is the amount of water and kind of keeping upright. So chloroplast is a specialized substance only found in plants. You are not a plant. Your cells do not have chloroplast in them. You do not have chloroplast because you are not a plant. You are an animal. Okay? But what does a chloroplast do? It captures the energy from the sun, and it's the process where photosynthesis occurs. It's a membrane-bound organelle, but photosynthesis is going. It takes energy from the sun and produces sugars, is essentially what it does. Plants feed themselves because they don't eat other things. So they're making their own food. Oftentimes we talk about a chloroplast is filled with chlorophyll, which makes our plants green in appearance. The leaves are often green on grass, on a tree or on grass. If you get grass stains on your pants, you are spreading chlorophyll all over your pants is what's happening. So if we're talking about our factory, it'd be like solar panels that are mounted on the roof, taking energy from the sun to then be used by the factory. Mitochondria is often referred to as the powerhouse of the cell. It goes through and it converts chemical energy. And when we talk about chemical energy, we're talking about food. We're talking about food energy into something called free energy that we can use in other processes to grow and reproduce and divide and just do the daily functions that cells do. So only organelles is the only organelle that has an inner and outer membrane besides the chloroplast. So this classic kind of folded interior that they often will draw on a mitochondria. So a lot of times you get like this thing and you have like, that's like a classic drawing of what a mitochondria would look like. Okay, so it'd be like the power generators of the factory that are providing energy. We're taking energy in one form, we're transforming it into other. So muscle cells are constantly using a lot of energy, so they have much more mitochondria than other cells will have. Cytoskeleton is something I'm super concerned about. It's this network of filaments. It's something that's important. It's not like the most important part of the cell, but without it, we would be in trouble, right? So it's this network of protein filaments that help maintain the shape. It's a skeleton, right? Your skeleton helps maintain our shape. A cytoskeleton helps keep the shape of a cell. There are these things called microfilaments and microtubules that form this framework. It's really important in cell division. Animal cells have these things called centrioles. They look like this. They're these little anchor points that when we get to mitosis and meiosis, we're going to be drawing like ropes off of, because that's what spindle fibers attach to help pull things apart. There's a specialized type of cytoskeleton called cilia and flagella that allow for motion. Cilia are these little like hair-like structures on the outside that kind of work together like oars of a Viking ship. I often assimilate it to. Whereas a flagella is a tail-like structure. The classic cell that has a flagella, it would be a human sperm cell, has a flagella on it that causes it to swim, allows it to swim, I should say. So in the factory, this would be like our support beams that hold the building up. That's what our cytoskeleton would be. There's two different parts of the structure of the cell that we're going to get into more detail in like next week. But there's kind of two different parts. So we have something called a cell membrane and a cell wall. All organisms, all types of cells have a cell membrane. Sometimes referred to as a plasma membrane, but they're one and the same. Okay, so we could also say plasma membrane, and we would be talking about the exact same thing as a cell membrane, aka, right? It's made up of a phospholipid bilayer. We'll get into more details on what a phospholipid bilayer looks like next week. And it lets certain things in, some substances in, but it prevents others from going in. So we say that a cell membrane is semi-permeable, allows some things but not all. All cells have a cell membrane. All cells have a cell membrane. In a plant cell, in a plant cell only, plants have a cell wall. It's made up of cellulose, so when you see a wood structure, like furniture, a desk, that is cellulose. You're looking at the outermost structures of the cell wall that have been dried, and that's what remains. They're strong. They are made tough to be able to make stems and roots and trunks of trees. And this would be our walls of our building if we're talking about our cell membrane and cell wall. Again, only plants, all cells. Okay. So this is kind of the classic example of if you were to look at all these kind of parts in a cell, where would they go? We have the nucleus in the middle. The endoplasmic reticulum is around the outside of it. Here's our Golgi apparatus, stacks of pancakes kind of all lined up. This is going to be a mitochondria because of the folded interior. I know it's not a chloroplast because it's an animal cell. Here's smooth ER versus rough ER. How do I know this is smooth versus rough? Well, this has a bunch of dots on it, which makes it look rough in appearance, where this one is not. Lysosome that we mentioned, and here's those centrioles, all surrounded by a plasma membrane or a cell membrane, right? They use the word plasma membrane here. Plant cells have a lot of the exact same things. In addition, they have a chloroplast. They have this cell wall made out of cellulose. They have a larger central vacuole, and that's really the big differences. So if you have any questions, please let us know. This analogy is something that you are going to be using in weeks ahead, but you have to come up with your own analogy next week. So kind of be thinking about that factory analogy and say, what could I do to make it kind of fit into what I know a little bit better? If you have questions, please let